Again, this is the Cult of Honesty. This is the place where we drink Kool-Aid. We call it Kool-Aid, but it's wine or possibly beer or something like that. If you have a problem with it, move on or something. But we like to toy with the ideas that are presented, that is, in this day. And tonight, the topic actually is about dogmatic atheism and theism. But we may continue a bit of Bob's show, the unconventional pastor. He has so much to say about the subject, about whether Jesus existed or not. And so maybe we have a few questions that we need to go over before we get into the main topic tonight. And so I'm going to give it to our panelists tonight. What are you guys doing tonight?
Hanging out.
Yeah.
Fun. Drinking beer and writing my religion paper on the historicity of Jesus.
Yeah.
Are you really?
Just drinking the NCG Kool-Aid there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When it comes to the question, when it comes to the question of even dogmatism, I think that it's great that these various books point out the various problems that are there, and I think we certainly don't need to be so dishonest as to sweep these problems under the rug or to pretend they don't exist. But the problems also have problems, and there's no end to it. And I think that therefore, the way it leaves me is this: if somebody really having looked at all of this, it just seems to them that it makes most coherent sense that this is just all myth. I don't have a problem with them having that as a conclusion. And if somebody looks at this and says, no, this just doesn't work for me, that this is just myth, I don't have a problem with that either. The things that I would have a problem with would be people who feel that, oh no, this is just it. You just have to think this way. He really existed, or he couldn't have possibly existed. But the only assertion there that I'd also, in terms of his existence, I certainly don't think that Jesus was the person as represented in the text. I don't think that the text is an accurate representation of who he was. But I really think that it kind of leaves us appreciating the problems, but we really don't have anything compelling to conclude, and no compelling reason to reject his historicity, and no compelling reason to admit to it. I don't know if that's going to work in your paper, but
well, as far as my paper obviously is a lot more. It's a lot more aspects than just a matter of whether he exists or not. I'm actually originally I was going to do it on whether or not the actual person Jesus existed, but it pretty much came down to a relevance matter. It really does not matter. It doesn't matter whether he existed or not. But it is going to be. I do have I've got the entire works of Flavius Josephus, and I went and looked up Bart Ehrman and some other things, and so it's going to contribute. But my paper is more on the different interpretations of teachings. Since we have so many people that say, well, Jesus said this, well, Jesus said that, and so on and so forth. The existence of the actual person is irrelevant to me, because even if the person, I'm perfectly okay with saying that this person Jesus existed. Just because Muhammad ibn Abdullah existed doesn't mean that he rode to heaven on a flying horse. So it's less for my personal purposes and for the purposes of the paper. His existence is really irrelevant. It's just more of a, what is it that people are doing with the notion of his existence now, or since then.
Right. If I can give this just as an encouragement, that is in understanding what Bart is writing and Robert Price and Carrier, I would spend some time reading all of their works to find the rhythm of what they're attempting to say, because in dealing with the history of Jesus, Bart is making things quite simple in his particular book, but it doesn't come without a lot of things that are understood. And so It's like things that we do in English. Sometimes things are just understood. And so in his discipline, he's very much a textual critic. He took Bruce Metzger's place. And so he is at the top of the list in a sense when it comes to being a person of textual criticism, whereas Dr. Price isn't, neither is Carrier. And so they're coming from a different axes, if you will, and they're looking at it through much different eyes. And so if you read Price's work, if you read Carrier's work, you're going to see that these people are looking at meta-languages rather than actually the documents themselves, which is a much different look. And so you're not going to get apples and apples when comparing these particular authors. Does that make sense?
Yeah, to a point, yes. But it's really it seems kind of like with the way that when I study science. When I first looked at this, I actually was sort of assigned this topic, which is really convenient, being that that this is what you guys have been discussing.
Right.
But
it's convenient that you're a cult member.
Right. Yeah, and I didn't even tell my professors that or anything. But oh man, did I just lose what I was just saying? Oh right, yeah. So the same thing with science. Whereas I thought it was going to be something very simple, where okay, well, I'll just lay out this person's argument, lay out that person's argument, kind of like throw it out there, and then I'll just pick a side of which seems more likely. But the problem is, the more that I've read about it, the more that I've researched it, the deeper it seems to go, and it turns out that what seemed to be a very simple 10 to 12 page paper has turned into, how the heck am I going to squeeze this into 10 to 12 pages?
I guess my biggest question for all three of these gentlemen would be, since we do not have all of the linguistic and non-linguistic elements, as I keep insisting that we don't have, how can you make an assessment of a text when you can't even understand the majority of it?
Well, and that's why I went to a more, instead of, this is how I'm going to lay it out, and I'm going to kind of choose a side, or I'm going to argue for or against it, or such and so forth. What I'm now doing is I'm just saying, okay, this is how these people take it. This is the kind of the stance that is, that these people take. So I'm interviewing Jehovah's Witnesses and a bunch of people, and I'm looking into a lot of resources that give different accounts and different interpretations, I guess, is the best way I can say it.
But Ehrman, Price, and Carrier are not using the same artificial models to look at when they're making their suggestions or when they're going back and forth. And this is typical when people are trying to get their book sales up. And so I'm simply suggesting this. The sales are up.
You're putting a ringing endorsement in for Bart Ehrman. Because of the fact that you're, I think the language that you used, and by the way, I have no problem with this argument. I'm just bringing it to the forefront for the sake of discussion. You said, much of what Bart Ehrman does, he replaced so-and-so who was a luminary of the style of technical linguistics that he's indulging in, and this, that, and the other, whereas Robert Price and Carrier are not.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're not backing down from that. You think that Bart Ehrman's research is a notch above.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
His area of expertise is more relevant.
I'm simply saying that when looking at the text, Bart is doing one thing, and this is the only thing that he's committing to in public. He's using actually a direct technique of modeling the text. He's not stepping out of that, which is unfortunate. And what Robert Price and Carrier are doing, they're looking at modeling in a different way, and so they're not comparing apples to apples. And so I'm simply saying that Bart is, in a sense, and has been criticized by staying in this bubble. It's a very protected bubble that is in higher and lower forms of textual criticism. And Robert Price brings wonderful questions to the table, and the same thing is true with Carrier. I'm not saying that one is better than the other or one has the advantage over another. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm simply suggesting that these scientists are not working with the same methodologies because they're not working with the same axes, if that makes sense.
Could you elaborate on that? Because puzzled.
Okay, I did not understand the question.
When you look at a story, there's the way you say it, and there's what you're saying. If you're a textual critic, you're really trying to look at you know, the way that it was said, and you know how that fits in, and things like that. So they're just different axes of looking at it.
Right. For instance, if I said, let's look at the text through the eyes of direct technique modeling, what you're going to get is form critical analysis of the text, and you're going to wind up with a grammatical approach that ignores completely the idea of pragmatics. And all three are ignoring pragmatics and much of what was called syntax. And so Noam Chomsky and Steven Pinker would say, in a sense, this discussion is extremely failed because they're not going full circle linguistically so. And so I'm simply saying that if we are going to look at these documents, if we are going to look at how these documents appear, we cannot just read, you know, let's look at a textual apparatus and say, oh, this was inserted at this point, etc. We have to look at why someone would say this insertion was, and read the data that is behind the scene, and look at whether a person is using direct modeling to look at what that means, as opposed to, say, an oblique method, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, all right now.
Because with oblique methods, you're considering the possibilities of transposition and many other different ideas. With direct modeling, you're not. And so, in a sense, what you're saying, and this to me is in a sense, it fails the conversation. For instance, if I say Greek is completely identical to English, I would be lying to you. And in a sense, direct techniques are assuming that we can swap form critically, form for form, and we can get and cut to the chase quickly on this. But reconstruction models of the text, that is, that are being done by people like Anne Nyland and others like her, lexical theorists, they're not even in the context of these particular discussions on the history of the Bible. And my question is, why? And so,
in your,
go ahead, Ozzy.
In your estimation, is there any sort of at the level, at the professional level and caliber of someone like Bart Ehrman, who does approach it methodologically in a way that you're recommending? Is there anyone who's doing that and just writing sort of within the guild, so to speak?
Your audio is breaking up. I can't understand what you're saying.
Sorry,
I think we need all of them speaking from every axis.
Okay.
Right. I think that we need a much variegated approach. I'm not convinced that using one model is best. For instance, if you take a person like Dr. Anne Nyland, I really appreciate her work. She is on the cutting edge. She has a lot more to say about the meaning of the text than a Bart Ehrman would suggest, because his expertise is more in the spelling of the text than in the understanding of what is written. Does that make sense, Ozzy?
Yeah, it does. Great. Can you hear me better now?
Yes, much better. Because, for instance, if I talk about textual variants, we're talking about spelling differences. And that's a very important study. In other words, we need to talk about specialists in the field. And so he's very good at really picking on why things were spelled differently and analyzing that portion of it. But when it comes to syntagmatic and paradigmatic analysis, he's not doing much of that. And so what he has done basically is accepted direct modeling as a translation theory. And he has simply said, I'll go with this, and this is what I'm going to talk about historically. But that's not the only model on the market. But he's not going into the oblique. And that's very failed. And so if you're going to look at the possibilities of what these manuscripts are suggesting. That is, in terms of their meaning, you must look at it from various angles.
There's actually on the database, the academic journal database that I use. There's actually a academic journal about that, actually.
Right.
I don't recall right now who it was that had that criticism of it, but there's actually like a good like 54-page paper talking about Ehrman's use of the way that he's talking about the spelling of things. I wasn't able to really dive into it because I obviously don't understand Greek and wouldn't know what they were talking about. But
for instance, Dr. Randall Booth is an excellent scholar, but what he does, and there are various platforms here. In other words, it used to be true that no one who did Greek, that is, Greek studies, would actually speak it. That is, use it in conversation, because the idea was to use a dead language would be to tamper with the evidence or to tamper with the text, and you may change up everything, and therefore you did not want entropy and all of that to happen. Can you see that point?
Is that something to do with, is that similar to, say, how you had the with the Jews, you had the people who, and I don't know why I can't remember this right now, but there were the sect of them which were focused on the text itself, the written, and then there were the ones that were focused on the oral Tanakh.
Yeah, well, the scribes themselves were only interested in the lettering and preserving that. They were not interested in preserving meaning at all, because this was a very arbitrary system, and it was traditionally modeled that way. And so my point is, and it should not be that complicated to see, when people study Greek, let's call it Koine Greek, what they have done historically is studied it, and Bob can tell you, you're not studying this to learn how to speak the language, but you're learning how to study the language. And so Dr. Randall Booth, he and others, that is, who are out of the category of Princeton and Harvard and other places like that, what they have done, they have created these models and are working with various students of Greek, but in a much different context of conversational Greek, so they can create a paradigm to create an efficient meta-language. For instance, to date, we have no Koine to Koine lexicon. What does that mean? That means that an explanation about terms and their usage needs to be done within its own language. If we took today and we had no English dictionaries, but we had an English/Spanish dictionary, and every one of our words in English was explained by someone who spoke Spanish and not English, they could not talk fluently in English, but they could only analyze the English by dealing with it, by tampering with it. Would we trust that dictionary? And see, this has been a big faux pas of the church. The church has only wanted that which a gloss system could exist with an explanation in English of the Greek text. Don't mess with the terms. And now linguists are looking at this and saying there is an advantage of being able to take what is written, put it into conversational into these languages. In other words, there's a reconstruction model. There are reconstruction models of the text going on and also of the languages so we can understand the text. We have both biblical manuscripts and extra biblical manuscripts in question. And so there are various models that are going on at the same time simply to get a better view of what is possible, that is back 2,000 years ago. Does that make sense?
Yes, I think it does. I think I mean, I could be wrong, but I think I have a pretty good understanding of what you mean.
I think it's important to point out.
My mind is blown.
Yeah, it's important to point out that if people are going to learn conversational Koine Greek, that will give to them a certain familiarity with the language that cannot be obtained any way other than using the language conversationally. It also runs the risk, though, that any language that is spoken conversationally is alive, and when it is alive, it becomes changed.
Right.
And so it has both benefits and risks. You know, so it's not always going to work.
So it's the good and the bad and the ugly. Yeah, that's what it is.
Right. So we need as you're saying, we need a much variegated approach to it all. You know, I remember one time it used to strike me as odd, but having, you know, come the way that I have through linguistics, I remember one time I was talking to a young woman who her parents were, I think, Lithuanian. I'm not sure but anyway, some other you know, European culture they came from. And her grandparents spoke a native tongue that was European, and she could not speak it. She couldn't tell you anything about it. But when her grandparents spoke, she understood them clearly.
Exactly.
And it's a weird thing. You know, it's a whole different way of being familiar with the language.
Right.
You know, I've actually had a Greek New Testament on tape, and used to listen to it. I cannot comprehend it that way.
Right.
Made no sense to me.
I wanted to ask Ozzy a question before we moved on, because you were asking me a question. Am I making any sense? I may be just babbling.
No, that was making sense to me, and it's a point I've heard you make before. So I'm okay with it. My question to you, though, earlier, I was breaking up, unfortunately, was, in your estimation, is there anybody of the caliber of someone like Bart Ehrman in New Testament studies who has a theory about Jesus and the historicity of Jesus, who writes on that subject, whose reading of the New Testament is informed by the method, the linguistic methods that you recommend? Is there anyone doing that?
I think that Dr. Ann Nyland is in the process of doing that, and she really doesn't have a dog in the fight. She's not a theologian. She's simply a lexical theorist, and she's great.
Are her works published on the academic journal database?
Well, she did.
Amazon.
Okay, she did publish her New Testament work, which is something that gays are applauding, simply because it has no gay bashing in it, because when dealing with what I keep talking about, syntagmatic and paradigmatic analysis, she found and has demonstrated over and over again there is no such talk about homosexuality in any of the manuscripts of what we call the Bible. And so it's a very compassionate understanding.
It's actually more
people.
condemning pedophilia than it is homosexuality.
Right. Yeah. And so she's very, very good. I don't think that she really has a strong bias. I don't think that she cares which way it goes. It's more about whether her discipline is good. She's very, very good. And I'm glad that she's a she in the context. Yeah. We need someone besides men involved in this. But I would advocate her, Ozzy. She's good.
Thank you. Has she written any popular books?
There's another side of this, though. The other side of this is that of the people who use a more modern linguistic approach to Koine Greek, those people would be people who, for the most part, could care less about the New Testament.
Right. And I don't think that you'll be able to tell whether she's a theist or an atheist. And I think she could care less.
Well, that's all to the good, actually.
Yeah, I really think so.
Yeah, it's something I'd rather not know about a person when I'm reading. A lot of people like to sort of read an author on a subject like this, and they want to know all their biases up front. And my approach to reading these sorts of things is always the opposite, if possible. I like to know as little about them as possible. I find myself being hypercritical sometimes. If I know too much about what I think their biases are, I find it easier to read them if I could just read them. And it's one of the unfortunate things I find about the internet is you can do a Google search or look on Wikipedia and find out all kinds of things about people, which can completely poison your opinion of them and keep you from reading them.
Yeah.
You know, and I find that happens a lot, actually. I used to recommend certain books to people, and because I thought, you know, this book might actually change your way of thinking. And now it is so easy to insulate oneself from reading anything that would shake you out of your existing opinion on something, because you can always find sources that will object to it. I remember Bart Ehrman's a case in point. I remember recommending Bart Ehrman to someone, a friend of mine, who's a very serious evangelical, and you know, he just, you know, Googled up the name Bart Ehrman, and then, you know, found a bunch of videos of evangelicals arguing against Bart Ehrman, and then that's it. He'd seen enough. He never needed to read a word by Bart Ehrman or anyone else I cared to recommend, because he could always inoculate himself against anything that I put forward. And so I'd rather read
one of my best reading lists from. When I was at Bob Jones University, they gave us a list of authors to never read, and I started reading them, and I thought, these guys are awesome, you know, and it was really there.
See,
Price has a story like that.
Right. I think that Price and Carrier have an abundance of wisdom to add to the conversation. I really like what they're saying. However, I think that people are misunderstanding Bart Ehrman. I think he's being extremely patient with theists. He's attempting to take people who have been stuck in tradition, and he wants them to feel comfortable. I think that he does that as a teacher. And sometimes we teach and get people comfortable, and when they become comfortable enough, we can bring up another idea and move them forward. The negative side of that is, you know, Price and Carrier are bringing up some things that need to be addressed now. And so, yes, those are concerns that I have as well. And so I like all of these guys.
Yeah, so do I, actually. I'm a fan of all three of these authors that we've been talking about.
Yes.
And I have to sort of hold their ideas in tension, because there are some things that I find very persuasive about Richard Carrier's case. Not fully convinced, but there's some things that have, I mean, Price and Carrier have, more than anybody else that I can think of, have sort of changed my way that I look at these texts. And oddly enough, they have raised and increased my estimation of these texts and my interest in them. I am more interested in the New Testament now as an atheist than I ever was when I was a theist. You know,
Makes sense.
You know, that's my fascination with atheists. They really want to get to the facts. They want to get to the meaning of the text, and that's special to me because, you know, to me it's not about whether Jesus existed or not. It's about what do these texts suggest, and are they mythical, are they not? I really don't care which way it goes. I'm interested in the truth. That is, if we can get there, and I'm not so sure that we can, because there are so many things that are missing in this conversation, and I'm simply trying to get people to be ever so cautious. Don't buy into these arguments so quickly. Reserve a little bit of thought and see that these people are coming from different angles, and at the end of the day, after several years, you're going to see that many things will come together.
Yeah, I would challenge you on one thing, though, that your glowing characterization of atheists and their view of the Bible and them just wanting to get at the truth. I have to, and the meaning of it. I have to say that, in my experience, a lot of atheists look at the Bible simply as a potential source of ammunition, you know, looking for contradictions and looking for you know, moral atrocities and things like that. And they read the works of Bob Price and Richard Carrier as sources that they can use and throw up in the face of Christians and say, see, he didn't exist. See, he's all made up. I mean, even Robert Price and Richard Carrier are not so categorical in their claims.
Exactly.
And I mean, they're much more nuanced. They're much more careful, especially Robert Price. I mean, he really is very careful in how he qualifies his claims. And I don't think Richard Carrier is reckless by any means, but he's a little bit. He states his case more forcefully. But one of the things about reading their books, though, is it forces you to confront what these books might have meant. When you stop sort of thinking of them as just one big book, these are all, different voices, all, singing in chorus, the same theology, right? Their works force you to sort of look at these books as separate works written by different people within a certain tradition, and you really have to sort of try to understand what these authors were trying to say and their context. And more than anybody else I've read on the subject, those two really make you think and appreciate that these books are interesting, and there is a fascinating mystery to be worked on and mulled over here. I find it endlessly interesting, and I credit them for sort of not only opening my mind to certain possibilities, but also providing me with an incredible bibliography of other books to read.
Right. I think that you have given us a powerful segue into our main topic tonight about dogmatic atheists and dogmatic theists. And so why don't you keep warming us up to that notion? I mean, are there dogmatic atheists out there? We know that there are dogmatic theists out there, that's obvious, but are there people of the atheist persuasion who are
Yes,
dogmatic?
absolutely.
That's a foregone conclusion. Yes, there absolutely are. There are some people who have never heard a theory, an interpretation of the Bible, that was critical of religion that they didn't absolutely love.
Dogmatic in general, or dogmatic and specific related to the atheism?
Well, I meant specifically with respect to atheism and the advancement of secularism.
I was going back to Dr. Jones's question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Okay, I could not hear the question. They have not provided me a monitor as to this. I mean, I went through Bob's show without a monitor. I could only hear the house speakers, and so I still can't hear.
Okay, I just want to know if you meant dogmatic in general or specific and related to atheism.
That's an excellent question. I don't know what I meant, but I was very ambiguous when I set this show up, wasn't I? And so
I could definitely pick out certain things that I would say a lot of the more mainline hardline atheists are dogmatic in terms of the use of certain language to describe how they feel about things, or the taboo against using certain words like spiritual or faith or even worldview. Like, I've been attacked for saying atheism or atheists have a worldview. Why?
Yeah, I've been attacked for that one as well. Another one is, if you were to say believe, oh no, heaven forbid, we have to avoid using that word too.
Yeah.
What's the problem with worldview? I'm just curious. Why would they have a problem?
There's a large segment of the atheist population that tries to separate them from the notion of a worldview. Now, I've argued that atheism, well, it shouldn't be considered a worldview because it's kind of like if you don't golf, that's not a sport. Mm-hmm. If you're not golfing, the act of not golfing is not a physical activity, much as atheism would not be a worldview. Yet at the same point, due to the fact that the majority of the population of the planet does have some sort of religious background, the lack of religious background would certainly affect one's view of the world, thus it would be a worldview. And I've gotten in argument after argument about this.
I think when the worldview comes into play is when you start crossing atheism with anti-theism. There is a certain degree of, I would imagine that being an atheist myself, I would say that there is a certain degree of, at least in America, that of anti-theism that comes easily to most or many atheists. The problem, though, is when people aren't able to distinguish what is an atheist versus what is an anti-theist. You don't have to be an anti-theist to be an atheist. I'm actually, and it's actually the New Covenant group that's really kind of drawn me from my anti-theism. Not that I'm not to a degree still anti-theistic, but it has drawn me kind of more towards the, or drawn me a little bit more away from that. And a lot of atheists really harp on the anti-theism and then hide behind the, well, they try and revert back to atheism as if they are just an atheist. if just be honest about what you are. Like, yeah, okay, I'm an atheist, and you can also say I'm also an anti-theist. But don't try to equate them as one and the same, because they're not.
Well, Tony, I'd like to take what you were saying as a pivot point to get to something you said earlier, which I think is totally relevant to what we're talking about right now. And you were talking about relevance. Now, you were talking about relevance in a little bit of a different context, in that, how important is it that the historicity of Jesus needs to be true? How important is it that you pursue that? What is the relevance of that to the discussion you want to have? And I'm paraphrasing, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounded like you were kind of saying, like, I'll accept what you believe so long as we can have a discussion and a dialogue about what it is that you believe in. You know what I mean? And so I think what makes that important to what we're talking about right now is any sense of dogma is admittedly the fringe of the bell curve, right? Most of us fit in the middle, and few of us fit on the fringes. So dogmatic thinking means that there are things that are really pissing you off in such a way that you feel maybe defensive or even offensive about going after. And I think that the point that we're trying to make here in this particular discussion, and in more generally at the New Covenant group, is how relevant is that? What is the relevance of having something that makes you so mad that you want to be dogmatic about eradicating it, instead of having a position that facilitates tolerance and or acceptance towards the idea that not everyone's going to agree with me, and what can we do to invite them into inclusive conversation instead of excluding them being due to my dogma. You know what I mean? So Tony, I'd like you to address it first, because you were the person who inspired me. So it's not even so much a question as much as it's a I'm just throwing spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks, to determine if it's done. You know what I mean? So like, what do you think about what I had to say?
Well, that was kind of a lot at once, but well, as far as to kind of start what I can remember from the beginning. So to start with, as far as the existence of like Jesus or something, and then being able to say, well, it doesn't matter whether or not, to me, it doesn't matter about whether, oh, well, I'm going to say, well, this person just certainly didn't exist, no way possible, and saying that, certain things that are claimed of this person didn't happen. If you're going to straight up just be like, well, Jesus never existed, Muhammad never existed, if you're going to just make these kind of claims, you're shutting down the conversation just right there, because no matter what this person has to say about their theology, it's just they're talking to a wall, because, well, none of it matters, because, I mean, you're talking about things that don't exist and never did. When I say that that it's irrelevant whether or not this person existed, I say this because it truly is completely irrelevant to me. And that doesn't make that doesn't mean that, well, if it's not a slippery slope of, if you admit that maybe this person Jesus existed, then, oh, well, if he existed, then, well, surely, there's a chance that all these other things could have happened. And it's not so simple as that. And when I don't think people should be dogmatic in any, and even though I have been in the past, it should not be dogmatic in any way, either way, because being dogmatic shuts down the conversation. Being dogmatic makes it to where there is no room for anything. It is just, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to preach I really hate using this term, it's one of those atheist things, really hate the term of preaching my atheism to you. But
Tony, I'd like to interrupt just for a second, because you're driving home a really important point, which is the value of conversation. Everything that you just said made it clear that having a conversation is more valuable than not having a conversation. And everything that you said pretty much pointed out, like, and X, Y, or Z would prevent said conversation, which means that whatever X, Y, or Z is, it's not as important as your desire to have the conversation. So I'd like to open it up to the panel a little bit. I haven't heard anything. I've heard a very little bit from Nelson, and I'd like to throw it to him in a second. But Matthew Steele, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the things that have been said so far.
That's kind of been my hobby horse for some time now. Arguments that I've been hearing from some have been just as the arguments that I hear from some theists. I don't want to compare the claims that are made by both sides, because that's apples and oranges. I'm talking about in the way that the way assertions are made, and it really is disappointing to hear the sort of unthinking position stated with such fervor, when there's no evidence to back it up. There's no rational argument to back it up. It's just stated as a fact. And I've listened to a couple of online quote-unquote debates lately where people state something that they know for a fact, and then when pressed about the point, they say it's because, and they see no reason to accept possible, therefore it is impossible. And it's
typing or something. Google keeps muting you randomly.
What's that?
Google keeps auto-muting you randomly.
That's funny.
I couldn't hear what you just said.
It's probably something to do with that, but my point is that I'm really hearing a lot from atheists these days about the believe that a God, or that they believe positively that a God does not, because they see no reason to think that he be a very common argument these days, and I could not. It's a very to consider there to be no argument just because you see no argument. You're failing to, or choosing not to. Position is valid. It's just based. It's a fail. And
I have to interrupt just for a second, Matthew. I think 13 is correct. I keep seeing your mic mute sign flash indiscriminately while you're talking.
Oh.
And I don't know what the hell that's about. But you know, I'd love to let you keep talking, because I think I'm getting the gist of what you're saying. But I mean, I think it's unfair to everyone else. You know what I mean? To miss out.
I can jump in with
saying so.
I can jump in with something. Just
I'd love
what he was saying that reminded me of as far as what we're talking about here, the existence of Jesus. I've been involved in a number of conversations with a bunch of atheists about that very topic, and for the most part, none of them, like, they have strong opinions on it either way. Mostly that he didn't exist, but it's nothing like what the level of how we're discussing it here. It's a complicated question, and most of what I hear from them is it's opinion, and it's completely uneducated opinion.
You know, for me, this is the one reason why I began identifying, when useful, as an agnostic theist, because I saw the question as just eternally, you could never get it settled, and I even got to the point where I felt that the nature of the question and the nature that we have in addressing it was such that it led me to believe that, that there is no possible way, for me, that is, at least it came to that point where, so I became what I would call even strong agnostic, that I don't believe it's possible to settle this issue in a manner of certainty. I don't think it is.
Well, I'd like to take this opportunity. We really haven't had a chance to hear from Nelson, and there's something I want to ask him specifically. So Kevin and not just Kevin, but I'm sure I'm guilty of it as well. We've all been using this historicity of Christ preamble to what we're talking about as kind of an example of atheist dogma. You know what I mean? In the sense that if you were to approach that question, the question of, is there a historicity of Jesus, in a dogmatic way, from an atheist perspective, you could really go to the fringe and say, no way. You know, this guy Jesus, not only is he a myth, but he's a myth in such a sense that he's a myth based on the ethers of chasing the dragon. You know what I mean? So, Nelson, I would particularly like for you to address the idea that, you know, dogma can creep in to almost any conversation, and maybe the discussion about historicity of Jesus shows where certain atheist dogmas exist.
And you know, and I think you're right, and I think part of the reason why that argument is often used as it being, you know, from an atheistic side, that absolutely no, he didn't exist, is because they know that that's the hot button. You know what I mean? They know that that is going to get to a Christian more than saying the Bible is not the word of God. If you say Jesus didn't exist, you've now gotten so far under their skin, you're like a tick on a hot day. You know what I mean? It's just you know, that's it. And I think a lot of it is purely for that reason. The irony of the whole thing is that neither side really has any evidence for their case. You know, I mean, the Bible says things, but the Bible also says that, you know, Paul flew up to the top of a Greek temple, I mean, of a Roman temple. It said that Jesus walked on water, Moses parted an ocean. There's a lot of things that the Bible says that, you know, from a rational perspective, anybody looking at it would know they're allegorical teachings and not necessarily factual events. But you can see this in even recent history, you know, with George Washington. I mean, a lot of us have heard George Washington with this cherry tree stuff, okay? And, you know, he chopped down the cherry tree and his father approached him and I can't tell a lie. The story is BS. It never happened, you know, but it's part of American folklore. It's almost believed like it actually happened. And it was used in the same way that a lot of what I believe biblical stories were used. And that was, you use a specific figure who's revered and venerated by many people, and you build your moral story around him. And that's what they did with Washington, and that's clearly what probably happened with Jesus. I am not going to reject the fact that a guy named Jesus lived and that he walked, you know, around in that obscure area of Galilee for, you know, 2,000 years ago and preached the things that he preached. I'm not necessarily going to believe that he walked on water and rose people from the dead or anything like that, but I don't think that that's necessary. I think that a lot of times, and we see this often in almost every religion, is that there are certain things that are intended to be purely symbolic, purely allegorical teachings, so that you can get a moral lesson out of it. And oftentimes, people mistake the symbols for what they symbolize. You know, they mistake the person for the story, and I think that brings up a question.
That brings up a question for me, Nelson, that I'd like to throw to 13. 13, if you're still there. What is the difference between adhering to a dogma, being educated, and being indoctrinated? Because everything that Nelson was just saying, to me, was totally dependent on what I call enculturation, which is the way that you think is a product of the environment that you're brought up in and the education you have. So, you know, there's a couple things that we can go over there. There's the indoctrination versus education dynamic, and then there's the indoctrination versus education versus dogma dynamic. And I'd like to get your opinion about that, 13.
I have to be writing in yellow, don't I? Okay. Let's see now. Education versus indoctrination versus dogma. Wow, that's actually a really interesting one, especially when you go to the enculturation angle of it. The thing is, you go, whether it be to school or what have you, or whether it's self-educated, this is how you learn things. This is how you can either reinforce or dispel dogmas. But as for indoctrination, it's such a loaded word. I mean, there's so much of our culture that could be regarded as indoctrination, depending on just how loosely you're willing to define it. I've heard people argue that school itself is indoctrination in a manner of speaking. But I think indoctrination has
dogmas, which raises the question for me, like, you know, like, what is the interplay here? Like, at what point are you just educating rational thinkers versus indoctrinating them in skepticism versus following the dogma of skeptical secular humanism?
I don't know why my wife handed me a soda to signify indoctrination. Oh, American indoctrination. Okay, sorry about that. Anyway, the thing is, I'm going to speak to indoctrination a little bit in terms of dogma. And I'm going to put it in computer terms. You have your PC people and you have your Mac people. Now, there are certainly people out there that are willing to do one or the other, but at the same point, there's one that's going to always go with the Apple products or always go with the PC-related products. Why? Well, that's a part of our culture as well. And you could do that, take that same kind of model and flip it onto religions or anything else like this. You grow up with these certain almost dogmatic views, and without actually investigating the differences yourself, you're simply going to accept what's fed to you. But at the same point, I wouldn't necessarily call that indoctrination. Indoctrination is something a lot deeper. That's when you're told not to question. And I think that's kind of where the line has to be drawn, is it isn't indoctrination until you're told you must think this way and you must not question.
Well, I'm not saying that you don't have to question right now, 13, but I am saying that you don't not have to stop questioning.
Guys, I'm having a lot of issues with my computer issues here, connection issues, and lag, and it's frustrating because I have a lot I'd like to add to the discussion. But
we can hear you fine now, by the way.
Yeah, it's coming and going, and it's not going to last, I don't think. I'm having problems with my ISP and complaining to them. And anyway, there's obviously, according to the comments, there's other people that want to come in. I know 2 other people, Negation of P and Claire Small, that want to come in as well. So, you know, let somebody else in who's going to have more they'll be able to contribute.
Okay,
so,
Matthew.
I'll talk to you guys later.
Matthew, your audio is perfect right now. Why don't you make those earlier points? That would be fantastic.
Sorry?
Those earlier points that you were attempting to make, why don't you go ahead and make those now, because your audio is doing wonderfully.
Okay.
But let me make a statement before you make that point. We keep being asked here in the studio by various, and we have questions coming in, not just from YouTube, but from other sources, and people are asking for a definition for the idea of dogma or dogmatic here. And maybe we can work with this, expressing opinions very strongly as if they are facts. And so if we can work on the premise of that usage, maybe we can, does anyone have a difficulty with that?
No, it's good.
Okay. I'm not comfortable with that definition myself.
Okay.
Yeah, I see dogma personally as mainly as something you're just not supposed to question in your little in-group, whatever that may be.
Okay, Ozzy, could you give me a definition that everyone would feel comfortable with?
Oh, well, I'll give you the, I don't know about that. I'll give you the definition that I'm comfortable with.
Okay.
I see it as a kind of a disposition, a mental disposition to take as incontrovertibly right or correct a certain view, one's own view invariably, without taking into consideration the evidence or arguments or objections that are put before you. So if you have on board in your head a pile of beliefs that allow you to sort of always deflect a view, like think of a conspiracy theorist, for instance, you know, you're arguing with someone who believes in a conspiracy theory, and they have in their head this view that the absence of evidence is evidence of the efficacy of the conspirators, and how good they are at covering up things, right? What they have sort of running in their brain is software that insulates them from any objection, and that is what I think dogmatism consists of. It's made out of having a pile of excuses ready to deploy at any time why you shouldn't listen to someone. Oh, you're trying to induce doubts in me. As soon as I feel a doubt or a cognitive dissonance, that's Satan working in me. As soon as you've got that stuff in your head, you turn into a dogmatist. If you have ideas like, oh, if I ever characterize my view as an atheist as a belief, oh, then I'm admitting that, you know, to irrationality, I have to always say no. I don't have beliefs. I have knowledge. I know evolution is true. I don't believe evolution is true, right? When you have in your head sets of ideas that allow you to dismiss evidence and objections and arguments and challenges to your position effortlessly without having to think about them, right? Just like automatic reflexes, that is, I think, when you've strayed into dogmatism. That is when your mind is closing. If you find yourself responding reflexively that way to what people are saying, then I think you're in it neck deep.
Okay, can I get an amen from everyone who would agree with Ozzy's usage here?
Particularly the aspect of incontrovertibility.
Well, I'm actually found myself on a little dictionary site here, and there really is a good reason why it should actually be defined, because there is a pretty broad difference in the meanings. Everything from specific tenet or doctrine authoritatively laid down by a church, principles concerning faith, morals, behavior, official system, prescribed doctrines proclaimed as unquestionably true, or to a settled established opinion, belief, or principle. Now, once again, this thing that comes across with most of these is that it isn't something that is questioned. Not necessarily it's something that can't be questioned. But it really is a matter of opinion and belief and what have you. And the reason why I'm kind of breaking it down a little bit here into something a little bit more vague and squishy, so to speak, is because there are things that could be seen as dogmas that could be positive, like the dogma of trying to love your neighbor.
Okay, but for the sake of clarity, that is this show, which will not go on for more than 38 hours straight, can we work with Ozzy's usage here? I think it's an adequate one. Would you guys say amen to that?
Fair enough.
Okay,
Indeed.
fair enough.
And I'd also like to take this opportunity. I know Augustin Camus is interested in interjecting a couple of thoughts or comments in an attempt to elevate the conversation. So I throw it to Augustin.
Well, the first point is, going back to Chris, is the question is, can you indoctrinate someone to be a skeptic? And I would say yes, because what you're doing is you're trying to say, I have these values, and I want you to have these values. That's pretty much what I would say indoctrination is. Now, let's say, I mean, that's what you're doing. Skeptics want their children to be skeptics. It's like, if they're religious, you're going to say, you're going to keep on asking them, well, why do you believe that? What you're doing is you're trying to instill your own values in your prodigy. You're indoctrinating people to have the value of thinking critically. So why should we think critically? Is there any value to being critical?
But you're talking also about the slippery slope danger of being a skeptic with a capital S as compared to a skeptic with a lowercase s, where you know, I don't remember whose hangout this was, but I addressed a comment made by somebody who said we should be equally skeptical about everything, and I was like, no, because to bring it home to what you're talking about, if you're indoctrinated to be a skeptic with a capital S, you would have to apply equal amount of distrust to the theory of gravity, knowing that you would step out of your bed and not fly into the air, as you did to, like, the fiction book that you were reading, knowing it was fiction written by an author making shit up.
Well,
you know what I mean? So, like, if you were to apply, like, indoctrinated skepticism to everything, you would be a functionless organism.
But you would still be a skeptic. Take this one. We can take it to more of an extreme.
That was the best response ever. But you would still be a skeptic. Best answer.
Chris, you want us to be skeptical of gravity. That's for me. That's a low game. That's that's child's play. How about if we're skeptical about reality itself? What if we're skeptical about ourselves existing? How far are we to press skepticism? Are we to be skeptical of skepticism itself?
If you're skeptical about yourself existing, then you can obviously prove that just by the fact that you're thinking that. It's that whole I think where I am.
You have these skeptical hypotheses. You have the simulation argument, dream argument. We're just a brain of that. How do we know that the perceived reality the reality we perceive is in fact what we would say the ultimate reality is?
Well, I was talking about existence, not about perceived realities.
I would say the cognito.
I think Augustine has a point. You can't separate the two. But I have to admit that without this conversation going into the rabbit hole of like the Matrix scenario and philosophy and this, that, and the other, brain in a vat kind of thing. If we were to be indoctrinated with the dogma of being skeptical, why wouldn't that lead some of us to the middle ground, which is my skepticism leads me to the point where it's not relevant to me in Tony's terms. It's not relevant to me what you believe or whether you think the historicity of Christ is valid or not. The discussion is the most important component, because that's when I get to connect with you as a human being.
Well, yeah, that's your bet. I mean, if you want to say, I'll be skeptical up to a point of something that functions towards my values, I mean, that's fine. I mean, it seems much more, you're taking a much more pragmatic approach there.
I really like your contributions to the conversation, Augustine. But I haven't really heard from Kevin as much as I'd like to, and then I'd like to throw it to Daryl.
One thing I was going to mention, the whole applying skepticism to all this scientific stuff kind of reminds me of what the ID creationists try to do. They're like, oh, we're skeptics too. We're skeptical about evolution, or people will say we're skeptical about atheism in general. And yeah, it can really turn into a shell game depending on how you're using it, and it's a tricky word. It's really a tricky word.
Skepticism can be useful, but then don't you have to sometimes demonstrate its use value before you can just make it a default response?
Yeah, that's why I don't use it to define who I am. I don't refer to myself as a skeptic, although I might be considered one.
Now, I don't think that anyone here tonight could provide me with examples of theists who are dogmatic.
There was never, not ever, a theist that was dogmatic.
There you go.
Not ever.
That never crossed your mind, did it? And so the topic tonight is about, dogmatic theist and dogmatic atheist. We need some examples. We need some working paradigms, if you will.
Dr. Jones, you have one on your show on Sunday at 12 o'clock. And for those
are you talking about me?
No.
No, I'm just saying. Aaron Ra is going to be on The Place.
Yes, he is.
12
We're going to start losing viewers now.
No, I'm excited about him being on my show, but I'd like to hear from you guys.
But let's face it. Well, hold on a second. Don't interrupt. You asked me for examples of dogmatic atheists and theists. We can all think of a handful of dogmatic theists, just because that might be one of the reasons why we even are interested in this topic of conversation, right? As atheists. But to be able to self-recognize... Kevin, I saw that comment just as soon as you posted it.
I've got a list about 5 pages long, but I'm not naming names.
Inside joke, but Aaron Ra, man, hey man, I had him on my show, Meeting of the Minds, and he is a really sweet, funny, intelligent dude that I thought took himself too seriously, but he really doesn't. But he's a firebrand, man. He says some stuff that really puts it in the ass of theists. He really likes stirring the soup. He's a firebrand. I don't particularly like his style in debate. I love his content when he's presenting or lecturing. But hey, and what do I know? And if I'm wrong, everybody tune in to prove me wrong at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time this Sunday on The Place.
It's going to be fun, and if you guys have questions that you want me to ask Aaron Ra, please send them my way. But give me some more examples. Let's get this conversation pumped up, because we have viewers watching, and hopefully we're going to have someone read some of these comments. Let's go for it.
Matthew Steele is a very dogmatic atheist.
He was supposed to get to say something. And,
he was about 20 minutes ago. Go for it, Matthew.
And
oh man, we waited too long. It's me.
Of course, right when he's got a.
Yay, Google.
yeah, it's got its. I still prefer Google, Skype. At any rate, I have had my own issues with the Church of Atheism, and the problem is always going to be that it takes work to be honest. It takes work to be right, and as with intelligent being correct, it's not ever something that you just are. It's something you're trying to be. So if you're just assuming, well, I am right, and I am in the right position, just by virtue of stating that as a fact, then you're probably wrong. And it's not because your method is incorrect. It's because you're assuming the conclusion and setting the cart before the horse. It's the process of working to get to that conclusion that's important. It's not arriving there and saying, okay, I don't have to do any more work. Okay, I don't have to check myself. I don't have to be critical of myself anymore. And that, I think, is the real bane of dogma, no matter who it is or what they believe, is deciding, okay, we're in the correct position, you're in the incorrect position, that's just the way it is, and that's the end of the story. And whoever's telling you that is being intellectually lazy. And I see that.
No, Matthew, I'm going to disagree with you, because if I'm cornered, that's all I have. If you're going to corner me and disregard all of the logic that I might think that I have about the position that I maintain, which I'll be the first to admit is mostly based on emotion, which is preference, I'm just going to rely on that. I'm just going to say no. The way that I think is right. The way that I think is right. I'm not saying that because you think differently it's wrong, but the way that I think is right for me.
No, it's not the way that I'm talking about. It's the conclusion that you reach, saying that it's absolutely true and makes you right just because you have that belief that you've arrived at. Like the belief that, say, purple is the best color. Now, if you're going to say that it is in fact the best color and anyone who disagrees is wrong as a fact, then that, and then you're telling other people that purple can only be the correct color. It's a dogma. You're not trying to justify your position about anyone else providing arguments against it. One example, there's a presuppositional apologist that I've been talking.
I'm sorry, Matthew. You keep getting muted again all of a sudden. I'm so sorry, man.
It's all right. Go ahead and
because I totally want to. So I had a bunch of really bizarro thoughts while you were talking, and I don't even know if I want to say them out loud. But I'll say the ones. Oh, you're talking about purple, and purple is the best color.
Okay.
Because purple is the best color, that means that Purple Rain is the best movie. And because Purple Rain is the best movie, that of course means that Prince is the best funk artist of all time. And he had a song called My Name is Prince and I'm Funky. And I want to state right now that my name is Chris, and I am funky. And
That's
I think
blasphemy, Chris.
I'll second that.
I'm talking more about a methodology than anything else of saying that you are correct and just expecting other people to accept that because you're saying it. And this presuppositional apologist that I've been talking to lately is arguing that the only source of knowledge is the biblical God. And my response is, all right, I'll agree that there has to be some sort of source. If you say you have objective knowledge that's objectively true, without question, you have complete certainty about some sort of fact, some statement external to your own mind. And it doesn't require, you can't justify it with your internal processes, you have to justify it externally. All right, I'll grant you that you need some sort of verification external to your own mind to reach that conclusion. Now, you're telling me that it's the biblical God. Tell me why. What is your justification for that statement?
Well, Matthew, I'm going to push back. I'm going to push back one more time, because as a musician, not to bring it back to Prince, but come on, he's funky. But let's face it. As a musician, when I'm in the moment, I literally feel like I'm tapping into something greater than me. And I have to admit, at those moments, I feel like I play better. I'm able to communicate better. I'm able to entertain more. Are you saying that I would have to explain to you where that comes from in order to validate the fact that I feel that way at that moment?
No, I'm saying that,
what's the difference?
The difference is what you believe and the justification for yourself and the justification you expect someone else to accept as true. That's the difference. If you were to tell someone else about that experience, that sensation of the music, the spiritual experience that you're going through with the music, if you're trying to justify that to someone else or to tell them that they believe in the same God that you do and they're suppressing that knowledge, then there has to be a way to go from point A to point B. And if you simply assert it, then it doesn't matter if it's true to you. You can't justify it being true to someone else if you just assert it as a fact and say that's all there is, and it doesn't matter if you accept it or not. There's no reason for anyone to believe you. So it's if you are just stating it as a fact, expecting someone else to accept it, not caring about your own justification to that person, or not admitting to yourself at least that you can't justify it to that person, that is a propagation of dogma. You're creating dogma there, and however many people you get to agree with you and listen to you, that is how cults get started. And that's my problem. It's not what someone believes.
Watch it, buddy.
It's what it's what
you're on a cult right now.
It's what you're pushing into their worldview. I heard a great analogy a couple of years ago about the explanation of individual rights and individual worldviews. Is that it's like you're on a chart. Your worldview represents this circle, and as long as your circle touches up against someone else's circle and the people that you're surrounded with in your day-to-day life, that's fine. But when your circle pushes into someone else's circle and breaks the bubble, if you will, or pushes their bubble away, then that's the point where your rights, your correctness ends. And that to me is if you apply that to this discussion that we're having with theism and atheism, or any ideological question, that's really, I think, the touching point where we have to accept that we do have a burden when we tell someone else that what we're saying is true, regardless of how true it is to us. It can be, as far as we're concerned, something that is undeniably true. But if someone else isn't able to reach that same conclusion, it's not their fault. if you know, you could be wrong. You could. No one is perfect, right? Except for Christopher Menotti, of course. I mean, you're the only perfect person here. So.
Oh, touche.
I beat you much.
Oh man.
Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling, and
I haven't had a chance to throw it to Daryl in a little while.
I'm honestly going to step out because there's too many people here and other people who want to come in, and my connection is frustrating me going in and out.
I need to jump in real quick because I really want this thing to get really to rolling, and so someone provided me with this upside down A. Can you see it? I mean, come on, focus that thing. Focus that thing. He doesn't know how to run it. Come on. Our jib operator isn't here, and so it's
the anti-atheist.
No, it's not the anti-atheist. It was just upside down, so I thought I would wear it in jest. But let me go to the marker board and give a demonstration, possibly from the standpoint of how theists are extremely dogmatic. I can take something from the text. I can say, hey, and I'm going to put this little breathing mark on top simply because this means that you're going to supply this H sound before this vowel. I can say, hey, agape, and then I can say, tu theou. Now we understand that this is in the genitive case and this is not. This is a nominative construct in the feminine. So my point is, if I translate this as I was indicating earlier, this is the love of the God. Now in English, we're not going to enunciate this particular term the because it's just overly used in this particular kind of context, and so a redactionist would simply say, well, let's take the term the out, the love of God. But translators look at this and come up with constructs like, oh, is this the subjunctive or, the subjective or the objective genitive? In other words, does the love of God mean God loves us? Or does it mean we love God? And so it's not clear, that is, as to what this simple construction means. And so when I say that people are dealing with this historically, they are simply taking a grammatical approach toward the text and giving you a grammatical analysis without dealing with the possibility of pragmatics. In other words, how do people use terms? I knocked the ball out of the park. I may be at the ballpark. I might have hit the ball and it went over the back fence. But when I said I knocked the ball out of the park, it may mean that I impressed my wife. She was on the front row, and I'm very proud of that. Or it may mean that I'm like Christopher Menotti, and I was playing this awesome bass solo, and I walked off stage, and I said, I just knocked a home run. And so we have to have the elements to be able to assess what is true and what is not. However, theists are not worried about all of the facts. What we do, we become dogmatic. Doggone, it's the love of God. Can't you understand? It's the love of God. So we ignore the facts and we spill ambiguity. And my question tonight is this: do atheists do the same?
Oh, yeah.
And my producer is saying, hell no. And he's an atheist. Okay, one producer says, which producer? And so shall I name him? And so I have this A, and I proudly wear this A, and I'm simply a theist, a multi-axial theist, capable of saying, yes, I'm an atheist, at the same time I'm a theist, because I don't believe that Zeus is God. And I do use God as a literary device, and so I'm guilty. And so with this A, with this wonderful looking serif, I'm asking us to get this conversation rolling. Didn't mean to butt in, but thought you might want to look at the A.
Sure you didn't.
You didn't mean to butt in. Horse crap. What I gotta say is, speaking of hitting the ball out of the park, give me a break, Dr. Jones. I mean, you just nailed it. You
Hello.
just nailed it. You just pointed out in no uncertain terms why the New Covenant group has the questions that it does about theism. And then you turned it around and said, and where does this exist in the atheist movement? To a panel of mostly atheists. Mostly. Oh man, you're killing me. So Darryl, what do you have to say about this?
Well, while I have the microphone, I have about 3 points I'd like to make.
Let me interrupt him again. No, I'm joking. Go for it, Darryl.
Go ahead. Knock the ball out of the park again. Now, let me try. The first point I'd like to make, earlier it was, the question was asked, can we think of a dogmatic theist? And according to the definition that Ozzy gave, which I thought was a very good definition. Okay. I think it described what I used to be very well. I mean, I think it nailed it. And so I could say I know what a dogmatic theist is because I used to be one. And I emphasize the term used to be. That's my first point. Now, my second point has to do with the historicity of Jesus. And you know, what I was thinking about, and I'd just like to introduce this as food for thought. If 2,000 years from now, people are talking about me, and I am the subject of as much conversation, the subject of as much controversy and interest as this one named Jesus is at this particular time and has the potential of continuing on in the future, being the same, then I would ascribe some significance to the character, whether he actually really existed or not. I mean, obviously there's got to be some significance there. And then one more point, my third point would be this. If it turns out and someday it's discovered there's proof that, undeniable proof that says he absolutely did not exist, he was not a real person, then I would like to know the people who came up with this character and gave him the life and the words and so forth that were ascribed to him, because I think they deserve a lot of credit, because it seems as though the idea was that this is a type of person that we can all be. You know, we truly have this ability to love one another, to care for one another, and this sort of thing. So, you know, any way you look at it, to me, it's worthwhile. You know, it's a subject of conversation that is very worth continuing.
Oh, Darryl for president, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
Darryl Furlow for president. I mean, let's face the facts. He pretty much took the whole the whole hot button topic and disassembled it like this. Well, even if I'm wrong, I'd like to know the people who wrote that story. Oh my goodness, how awesome is that? It's 7 flavors of awesome that I don't even have words for. But in an attempt to spread the love around, and I know, Augustine, I know you have some things that you want to say, but I do need to, like I said, spread the love around. I haven't heard from Bob in a little while, and I'm going to throw to Bob the question that Augustine put into the comment section of the group chat. Can truth be dogma, Bob?
Can truth be dogma? Well, depending on what you mean by truth, if something, there are plenty of things that are true and we just don't know that they're true. And one can have an unjustified certainty of something that turns out to be true. For example,
let's assume, I mean, because you're talking very subjectively and relativistic. Let's assume that we all, for the sake of discussion, Bob, that we all agree on the correspondence as well as coherence philosophies of truth. Correspondence being, you know, Truth is something
so
that
you're talking
corresponds
you
to.
certainly recognize truth, and we're not going to really even disagree about it. Can that be dogmatic? Well, first of all, I think it's important to recognize that the attitude of dogmatism is operates cognitively the identical way that certainty does. Whether we can, for example, being stubborn and being determined are two different words that can describe the same internal dynamic, but they have different flavors in how we're evaluating the person involved in such behavior. So if we're insisting on the truth, our style and our way of thinking will be, in terms of cognitive dynamics, identical to the dogmatist. But we just might be, more people will let you get away with it, particularly if we can be in agreement with it. I mean, if we're dealing with a person who perhaps struggles with schizophrenia and has hallucinations, and or a person who's very paranoid and they think people are out to get them, we can sometimes be rather dogmatic in attempting to get them to see that they are distorting reality. And I suppose that there's no real difference in terms of the feel, the style, and the dynamics working inside of that dogmatism. I think that dogmatism is therefore really defined in terms of its appropriateness to the context. Is that answering your question?
Oh, I mean, it's not my question. It's Augustine's. I mean, but I thought that you gave a very articulate and nuanced answer. I mean, without a doubt. But I do understand that Ozzy is super interested in having a crack at this in his own terms. So, Ozzy, what do you have to say about this particular topic?
Yeah, thank you. With respect to sort of truths and dogmatism, I don't think there's any paradox there. Dogmatism, the way I characterized it earlier, is just a species of irrationality. And irrationality is just sort of arriving at your beliefs the wrong way, for instance, right? You can arrive at a true belief all wrong. You can have just the most egregious reasons why you believe something that happens to be true. Okay, and that's unfortunate when that happens. It's lucky in a way that you arrive at the truth, however you arrive at it. But I mean, if you arrive at it for all the wrong reasons, that's not really to your credit, but it's to your good fortune that it happened. But you can be irrational with a head full of true beliefs, just because you arrived at them all wrong. And the problem with dogmatism is that you're just think of a dog holding on to a rag or something, and you're trying to tear it out of its teeth, and you're trying to say to someone, no, you've got some false beliefs here, and you're trying to help the person, you're trying to disabuse them of a falsehood, right? The problem with dogmatism is that people will not let go of their belief because they've taken on other beliefs that insulate that belief from any attempt to dislocate it from their head, okay? But you can have a true belief in your head, and you can still do that. So you could have arrived at your belief for good reasons or bad reasons. It could be a true belief or a false belief. I don't think it matters. And someone could be trying to dislodge a belief out of your head that is in fact a true belief and that is arrived at for good reasons. And you can still be a dogmatist about it because having arrived at that proper belief and arrived at it properly, you are now closed. You now decide, I don't need to hear another word on the subject. I'm not going to take on board anything anybody says. I'm not even going to consider any evidence seriously. I'm just going to mouth the words. I'm just going to pay lip service to skepticism and rationality, but I'm not actually going to consider what you're saying. And I'm going to prejudge any evidence that comes my way, or any argument that comes my way as being junk or from a source that I can impugn in some way. You can be dogmatic about things that are true and that you even arrived at rationally. So I think dogmatism is something that can infect anybody's reasoning. It's one of the things that's wrong with, or let's put it this way, one of the things that's so dangerous about a belief that has become dogmatic is that it just ossifies into a prejudice. And
Augustine, is what Ozzy is saying resonating with you at all?
Yes, well, I like what Bob said and what Ozzy's saying.
Okay, good. Well, then I'd like to challenge you.
Sure.
In an attempt to pivot it towards you. Ozzy talked a lot about rationality and things and dogmas being the result of irrational processes and things of that sort. And, you know, if you haven't talked to me at all, you might not know that one of my favorite things to bring up is how predictably irrational humans are. So using a word like rational, irrational is completely useless to me in talking and in having the kinds of discussions we want to have, because we're all humans, and the way that our irrational minds have evolved to process information has led us towards individual differences. I'm interested in those individual differences, and that's my in-group, right? So I want to address that with you, Augustine. What's wrong with the idea that, you know, we are all more similar than we are different, but also that you know, the labels of a theist and atheist are misapplied when we're trying to have the kind of conversation that we're having right now, right? We're having a conversation where there are theists on the panel, there are atheists on the panel. We're all irrational as human beings. And for one side of the in-group to say, well, we're the rational side, and you're being irrational, is a load of horseshit.
To say, I find it a bit offensive that you're saying that we're all humans since I'm a gadfly. So,
and I think that's the second time tonight that you blew my mind with your your wit.
Also, we get to discriminate against you for that.
2-0.
Well, you know, in terms of irrational dogmatism, if we were to have some theist in our midst tonight who is going to be just absolutely demanding, there is a God, and I don't care what you're saying, and there is a God, and we have opposing them some atheist who's saying, oh, absolutely no God of any sort whatsoever. The truth is, one of them is right.
To note, also, I'm also an atheist, so your characterization of being atheist or theist is also off. But it seems to me that when Ozzy was talking about dogmatism being a mindset, being an irrational mindset of, you know, holding on to the bone, we can't do that with truth. And we all try to enforce, you know, we don't have the same value, so I would say you're wrong in, you know, you're wanting to converse with people. I want people to be, you know, skeptics and think logically. So, you know, that's how I'm going to come at them most of the time.
Yeah, and
but, you know, if you want to, you know, if your value system includes, you know, having the conversation, that's fine. And I will say people are, for the most part, irrational. Another thing is that whenever irrational is stated,
well, that was the main point that I was trying to make, was the irrational line of continuity across humans or even gadflies.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree to that. Look at the chat. Yeah, I'd agree. Humans are, for the most part, irrational. I think that's how we're meant to function. We're not meant to be irrational. We're not Vulcans, unfortunately. Not yet, though. Not yet.
Emotionless Vulcans live long and prosper. So I know that Nelson has just has joined us because he's had a little bit of a connection problems. Nelson, you know, as somebody who is not an atheist on this panel, or not self-described as an atheist, if I remember correctly, but I would like to hear from you what you consider the dogmatic atheist luminaries.
Well, I think from, you know, I'm neither theist nor atheist. You know, I identify as a pantheist because I have a completely different view of divine. But as far as to the question, I think when atheists completely rule out anything in regards to not necessarily the ridiculous notions that of a bearded tyrant in the sky or anything like that having to be God, or even the God of the Bible or the God of the Quran, but when they rule anything out, anything at all, I think that's the most dogmatic type of atheism, when they don't even yield to the possibility of something, not necessarily something that can be described or identified or even comprehensible to us, but when they reject that and just surrender to random chaos, I think that's the most dogmatic, probably the frustrating dogmatic view that some, not all, but some atheists take. I mean, I don't know how the atheists on this panel particularly identify, or if I need to clarify that further to make more sense. But that's, I guess I lost where I was, but that's what I think. For example, Christopher, you were talking about your music.
Sure.
Okay, and how you feel something, right? Well, why isn't that something God? Not necessarily Jehovah or Allah or something like that, but when you look at animals and
Nelson,
how
that's the very question that I was raising. You know what I mean?
Right.
So when I have that experience, I chalk it up as this wonderful connection of synapses in my brain. I mean, that's my explanation of it, genuinely. But man, it feels so external that for me to admit that I have an internal explanation for it kind of is like, yeah, well, I know that I have this explanation, but man, it felt like I was tapping into the musical spirit that exists all around us. And my finger was on that pulse.
Because you were. When you think about birds, think about dogs, think about how all of a sudden before a natural disaster or a storm or something like that, they start to act weird. They start to collect together. They start to they get, because why? They're connected to the earth. They're and I'm not trying to get all Deepak Chopra on you, but I'm just saying they're connected to what exists, to mere existence. And people, we've become detached from that. We have computers, we have lights that dim out the stars in the sky. We've completely detached ourselves from nature by our own doing. And I think that things like music or smoking things that aren't necessarily over the counter, and drinking or whatever, anything that you do that can allow you to relax from the daily norm that there is, then you all of a sudden find yourself connected to that something greater, and that's God. It's all of us. It's everything that's connected, everything that is. And I think that if we could all kind of adopt that and realize the fact that it's the here and the now and it's the everything, then it's a lot more palatable. This is my opinion, but I'm not trying to be, a proselytizer, because I'm not going to collect a tithe at the end of the night either.
Well, no. But I would like to open it up to the panel now. All right, Nelson is raw meat. Go.
As a self-described atheist, I definitely agree with that. I've had meaningful spiritual experiences even after I left Christianity, and sometimes I'll admit I use the term atheist to describe myself somewhat begrudgingly, but I think it still applies because I don't call those things God. I don't necessarily have a God concept, but yeah, I definitely agree with that. I know it. I understand what you're saying, and I've definitely felt the same way. And I'll admit, like trying to explain that some of those feelings to some of my more hardline atheist friends, they've been just very dismissive of it. And I'll admit,
Buddhism as a religion, an atheist religion. I mean,
it can be
part of Buddhism. It's more a way of life that believes in a spiritual reality, but there's no entity involved in this. It's really more of a kind of an infrastructure of reality.
Right. That's why I would say it's definitely not a contradiction to be a Buddhist and a Christian or a Jew.
In Korea, it was very common for people to claim to be a Buddhist as a way of processing things, and a Christian in terms of what they believed.
Maybe someone else can identify with this. I have a this feeling, this thing that I can express toward my wife that I can't really see, I can't weigh it, I can't put anything physical to it, but I know it exists. And I would say that if some supposed God got in the way of that, I wouldn't want anything to do with that God. But if some sort of a belief that there is not a God interfered with it or got in the way of it, I don't think I'd want anything to do with that either. So I'll take it for what it is and enjoy it.
Well, I'd like to take that as a moment to tell you, to tell everybody that I feel a certain way about Tony Carroll that I can't weigh or measure or describe in adequate terms in such a way that it can be quantified. But it's a quality that that exists, and I believe in Tony Carroll.
Yeah.
And I think that Tony Carroll has a question that he wants to raise.
Well, it's less of a question, more of a response. It was actually a few things, but I don't know if I'll be able to compile all this. But so when it comes to Nelson said something about well, we could just say, we've got this feeling, with like Chris Mowdy with his guitar thing and with the, or bass thing, and this kind of higher power experience or whatever it is. And why can't we call that God? Why do we need to call that God? Why do we need to put a label on that also matches a label of something which means so much more, in the sense of surely, yes, it may not mean everybody's definition is the same, but when we're talking about things that people are understanding, if you're going to call it God, it's sort of like Epicurus said, like I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but basically, like, why would you call it God? And it does have baggage, just like the word faith has baggage. I admit myself, I'm an atheist. I'm an atheist. And I hate calling myself an atheist. I never thought I would, because I was one of those real, go-getter militant. I was totally cool with being called a militant atheist. Like, yeah, I'm militant. Let's talk about it. Let's, challenge me. But nowadays, now that I'd like to say I've found a little bit more of my reason, or I've found a little bit more reason that I didn't have before. And so now it's more so. I don't like calling myself even an atheist, because when I say something like that, not only do other people immediately say, "Oh, well, you're making this claim that there's no gods or anything," but also to myself, being that I grew, when I left Christianity, when I say I grew out of Christianity, it really made me abrasive towards anything that really suggested such a thing. Now, I really love physics. I really love physics and chemistry. And when I look at things like quantum mechanics, when I look at things on the quantum level, there's just no making sense of it. I mean, there really isn't. Even when you kind of understand what's going on, you really don't. I mean, it's and so there is this automatic sort of, wow, there's just so much going on that I just don't understand, and I really could. I think that I couldn't possibly understand, and I'd like to attribute this to something else, and I have no problem with attributing it to something else as long as there is a reason to think that there's this something else. I don't want to be the dogmatic person of the dogmatic atheist and say, well, there's no possibility of any deities out there. Well, I'm fairly certain that there's no that the Christian God is not real, at least in the way that it's been presented to me. I would not at all say, well, there's no possibility of the deist perspective of, well, maybe there was a deity that created this universe or something of the sort. But when you come to things like the birds and dogs and whatnot, or animals, like knowing the weather is coming, you really have to also look at the fact that, or not the fact, you have to look at, there are other things in play here that go beyond, well, they know, it's like a tree, like when you know it's going to rain because you can smell the trees opening up, and releasing that chlorophyll or whatever, however that works. it's not that, well, I do not believe that they have this sort of, psychic ability to predict this is coming. We just can't see why they know this is coming. There's a reason, like how some dogs just really know when people are just shitty people. I would say 50% of the time, it's a 50-50 thing, but I'd say 50% of the time, or 60% of the time, if a dog really doesn't like somebody, there's probably a reason behind it. And it may not be something where it's like, well, they're psychic and they know, but maybe a dog can catch on to vibes better than I can. Maybe birds and trees catch on to something that I don't have the ability to. I can't see an infrared. My senses are only so far. And so I would not attribute these things to divine sources of which I can't make sense of or not quantify, but qualify. I don't know if I use that.
I think you, sir, have been drinking. I think you've been drinking too much of that NCG Kool-Aid. That's why you don't want to call yourself an atheist.
It's not that I don't want to. It's just that I don't want to have I don't want people to stop listening to me because of that, and I don't want to say to myself, I am an atheist, and by saying this, I take on this. There are no gods.
Yeah, I feel the same way.
It's not anything of the sort.
Nothing dogmatic about just identifying as theist or atheist. Just identifying that way can come across as an unspoken dogmatism.
To some people it can, and it's because of that mass perception that I have witnessed that makes me hesitant to say such things, because when I say I'm an atheist, when I say that, I mean that I do not believe that there are any deities, because I haven't heard of a deity that makes plausible sense to where it gives me a reason to believe such things. It's not saying that I have thoroughly tested out, every theory existent. I mean, it's not anything of the sort, and it's not that I would reject any plausible. It's not that I would reject anything that might actually make sense. If something came to me, or I wouldn't say specifically to myself, because even if I had, let's say Jesus walks through my back door right now, that's not going to convince me that therefore Christianity is correct. I would need to have something else there. It's not because I understand that I'm not, and I wasn't misunderstanding Nelson. I don't think I was just saying on that because I know other people are watching. And I just I just wanted to clear that up before somebody jumped on that and was like, oh, yeah.
I want to say something concerning what you're saying. Wow, I mean, you're really exploding with some honesty here. I think we all need that kind of honesty, to be honest with you. If I can repeat honest over and over again, and I'm doing so intentionally. Some of the things that I keep experiencing are like this. Theists don't want me hanging out with atheists. And that really troubles me. And I'm finding that a lot of atheists who are hanging out with theists like myself, they're getting a lot of flack for hanging out with theists. And so my question is, and this is near the end of this show, are you guys hearing the same thing as I am about people trying to keep you away from hanging with theists or atheists?
I give myself trouble for being me.
I got a question. Is that BJ Saber?
That was Bob.
No, I mean, is he on the hangout?
Yes, he is.
Hello, BJ.
He needs to unmute himself, though.
Okay. I didn't mean to interrupt. I just.
If you move your mouse to the top of the screen, there'll be a little pop-up thing that'll appear right in the middle towards the top of the screen. And there'll be a little red microphone there. Just click that and it'll unmute yourself.
Ozzy, do you ever get hell because you hang out with theists like me?
I wouldn't say I get hell, but I get some pressure. I get some people who are a little sometimes disappointed, that you're somehow a communist, or you're giving people a pass. You're just being a little too chummy. It really, the appropriate stance of such as myself should be a kind of take no prisoners, give no quarter approach. You should always be in attack mode. You should never have a conversation with an atheist where you're not dedicated to demolishing their views. And of course, they won't come out and say it this way, but that seems to be the motivation. Why would anyone having fruitful conversations with you or Matthew Bell, Fiona Robertson, or anybody,
But
some people just sort of feel. So yeah, I get some pressure.
Okay, but I want to put you on the spot because I typically do, correct?
And most people are pretty.
Okay, I typically put you on the spot. Do I not? Ozzy, are you still there?
I don't get enough. Yes.
Okay, do I put you on the spot from time to time?
You do.
Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot once again, and I don't mean anything bad by this, but you're such a genius. I think that you can really put this together. Don't give me a free pass right now. I'm a theist, a multi-axial theist. Go ahead and say what you need to so it will satisfy, in a sense, those people who are pressuring you.
Okay, well, what I'm going to say is not going to be anything you haven't heard me say before on shows and in Hangouts right here at NCG, and in comments, the Cult of Honesty. I think that theism, every form of theism that I'm acquainted with, is a species of irrationality. I don't think a person has an irrational belief, but I think that ultimately theism is a kind of superstition. And so you, Dr. and you, Bob Graves, and my other good friends here who are theists, I think you are in the grips of a mistake, and I think that it's irrational because I don't think that there is a rational pathway by which to arrive there ultimately. That it's, I got to qualify that, arrive at a false conclusion rationally, but I think you're rational, reflective people, and I think you've made some mistakes along the way. But I don't know. Obviously, you think I'm irrational. You also think that I'll come to the wrong conclusion because we hold all conclusions, but I'm sure you're systematically irrational. What else can I say that I haven't already said 100 times in that capacity? Yeah, so I guess that's it.
Okay. I wouldn't consider you irrational in the least, personally. No, I think it's a perfectly viable conclusion. And if there really is no way you can see how a person can be both theistic and possessing a rational process by which they get there, that's where you're at. I don't have a problem with that, to be honest with you.
I don't either, because I don't find you to be irrational in any sense. Yeah.
I don't think that when I say that you're irrational, I mean that you as a person are irrational. I think you're all very rational people.
And I accept the possibility that
I think the belief is ultimately
processes could be very faulty in leading me to this conclusion. I fully accept that as a very real possibility. And there's a sense in which I'm not even invested in my own conclusion.
Well, I'd say that about myself, the possibility that I am sort of off the rails in this respect, in thinking that there aren't any good argument. It could just be judgment on part, but I don't think it is. So I think I'm being, I think I've come to the right conclusion, obviously. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the conclusion that I have. And likewise, you would say the same thing. For your own position, I mean.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't see you as an irrational person at all. I am multi-axial, and every axis that I am sitting upon doesn't agree with the other. And so I can say that I'm much variegated, and I may be diametrically opposed to myself in many areas. And so I guess I could be one living in that delusion that many people talk about, and so that is a possibility for me.
Yeah. What a relief!
Yeah, well, maybe that'll satisfy.
Do what? I didn't get that.
I said, well, maybe that'll satisfy some critics.
I hope so, because, you know, I want so bad to have conversations with people who know how to think, and I can't learn anything unless I'm around rational people, and I find atheists to be extremely intelligent. And I'm not just blowing smoke here, because I find that they want honesty, they want you know, long conversations, they're willing to hang in there for long periods of time, and typically with theists you don't find that. And so I am applauding the atheistic community at large, and I respect them. But I'm simply asking atheists to be patient with me as I'm attempting to rethink so many things. And so that's where I am, and I think Bob identifies with that to a certain degree.
Absolutely, yeah.
Could I put a dot over the I on that?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, what you've just described there, what you've just exhibited, I mean, even if I think that your conclusion is ultimately an irrational one, because I don't think that there's a rational pathway to get to that conclusion, it doesn't mean that you are irrational. But what you've just done here, what you've just described, your particular stance, is sort of the very opposite of dogmatism, right? You have described the opposite of closed-mindedness, right? And it is irrationality and dogmatism that we need to be worried about. But we're all irrational. We're all subject to irrationality, as Chris Maudy was saying earlier. But dogmatism is something that we can really work to avoid, and really we need to work to avoid, because dogmatism, as I said, it's a species of irrationality, but it's a particularly pernicious one because it's an epistemological liability. It undermines a person's own interest in having a correct picture of reality. It's contrary to your own interests, in other words. It undermines your own efforts at eliminating errors from your own belief set. And what you've just done here is absolutely the opposite of dogmatism.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I need to learn something here, because you're the genius in this context. And I really mean that, because so many people around here keep telling me we need to get Ozzy in Pensacola. He is awesome, and you are. Would it be best for all of us, in a sense, to rise above our theism and atheism and move on?
No, I don't actually agree with that. I think, you know, if you're an atheist or a theist or an agnostic or wherever you sort of lie on this, or whatever flavor of atheist or agnostic or theist that you are, that's what you are. But you don't have to. What's that?
How could you be anything different and still be honest? You know, and
yeah.
It seems to me, though, what he's asking is rise above what we are. I mean, we are that, but can we act as if we're not and move forward?
We do rise above it here. I think we really do. I mean, we seek to do that.
But what I'm talking about
how many of us here in this conversation are going to hold a different conclusion against anybody here in this conversation? I can't imagine it.
But what I'm talking about specifically is rising above what typically is known as theism and atheism, and finding a better model. For instance, in humanism, I find that to be very appealing, but I want to raise the bar on that, like I want to raise the bar on everything. And so when I say rise above, I'm simply saying let's raise the bar higher and higher. And at some point, maybe we can find something, better labels or a better way of looking at something. I'm talking about taking these artificial things that we have, perspectives. You know, I have a perspective on truth. I don't have truth itself. It's simply a perspective. That's all I have, and it's something that I do wrestle with. And so this is why I need you guys in my life. This is why my wife and I love having you guys come to the place, come to the hangouts, and we become, in a sense, you know, working together. This is wonderful.
I take the conversation more seriously than I take myself.
Yeah. Well, I think you have to. You really have to.
Definitely.
We all take ourselves too seriously.
I think the important thing is you know, people are going to believe what they believe, you know, and I think what we should be trying to do is to make sure that there's not a blind acceptance, and that there's not a dogmatic acceptance, and that we continue to strive to know more,
to learn more, to be better people, and to make sure that whatever it is that we believe, that we don't use that as an excuse to oppress or hold somebody else back.
Yeah, and I would say too that, you know, the reason that it's good, or at least conceptually, to transcend the notions of atheism or theism or even agnosticism or anything else that could be, you know, under that umbrella category of theism in any form, is so we quit self-identifying with that and actually just see it as our conclusion for the moment, I think we would say. So then we would have a platform to better transcend those things. And I think that's what's very important, is we quit self-identifying. I'm an atheist, I'm a theist, I'm an agnostic, I'm all of these things, and work towards a greater kind of interdisciplinary effort towards hopefully a greater truth or understanding.
It's more of a true statement that, you know, instead of saying, you know, I do identify really just for useful purposes as an agnostic theist, but I mean, really, to be honest with you, in the thoughts and in the doubts and the certainties of my mind, is it 90-10? Is you know, is it 89-11? I don't know, but you know, it's not as if there is within me this absolute certainty. I recognize the possibility of being incorrect in my conclusion, and there are times when that seems right to me, you know. But so I think that in a sense we have almost forced ourselves to pick one or the other, and is that can't this be a continuum?
Right. We are at the end of the show, so I'm going to give everyone a chance to give a final comment. Left or right, please start.
13.
Oh, that's right. I'm on the left on everyone else's screen, aren't I? Boy, I'd like a show worth of comments here. I was going way back to the thing about atheists and dogma. What was initially coming to mind were a few choice quotes. There was a certain YouTuber that interviewed the Westboro Baptist folks and referenced a line in the Bible in which it was referencing two men in a bed. Of course, he didn't know the context of it, but he was trying to claim that this was promoting homosexuality. He was holding on to insisting that this was correct because it was a dogma he was holding, that this line must be interpreted this way. We have the host of a popular show that when referencing the New Covenant group, his immediate question was, what's their angle? Because of the assumption that all theists must have angles. Then we have Bruce Shepard, who made a video saying all babies aren't atheists based upon their cognitive development. They can't make any kind of value claim on it. Yet atheists crawled out of the woodwork to go berserk over it. And then there's a matter of my personal dogma, which is anyone or anything that claims to be a god, or speak for one for that matter, is either lying to themselves or lying to you. And that's really it. We have to figure out what our own personal dogmas are. We all have them. It's you know, you can use them for good, you can use them for evil. It really comes down to that. But at the same point, we do all have our dogmas. We do all have strange beliefs that we don't bother to really think about or question. And sometimes I think it's important to sit down and figure out what they are.
Awesome. Next.
Okay, next we have BJ.
Okay, well, I'm late, obviously, to the game, but I think the one thing that I've been looking forward to in this discussion as well, as the comments and things I've heard from people, is that, you know, and in fact, it's been a more positive and hopeful experience, is that, you know, we really need, I think, to transcend these arbitrary labels and really get, you know, so many things that could become sectarian differences just need to be done away with. And we need to just say, you know what, it's time to really, hopefully, move forward to some higher truth that we can do, and that, you know, just when we think whether our dogmatic position, whether it be atheism, agnosticism, or theism, is that there could be the next scientific discovery or philosophical insight right around the corner that could totally turn that on its heels. And I believe also, in part, in doing this, in trying to transcend these labels, we need to be willing, I think, for me personally, to accept more mystery in the universe and within ourselves as well.
Thank you. Bob.
It's awesome. The fact that we can even have this conversation. We're struggling with questions, and that's wonderful. One of the things about it's like riding an exercise bike is you never get anywhere, but it's healthy. And I think that in many ways it's just helpful for us to keep in mind there are some ways in which all of us will change, and there's some ways in which we may not. And we don't know which ways will be in what category. And it's only by being honestly and open in the conversation that we can move forward. And I am committed to one idea. My best future is not by being committed to my conclusions, but by moving forward with honesty and allowing myself to be and become whatever it is that my path demands of me, in a sense of at least coherence and honesty, And so there's no investment there. And I think that the fact that we're having these conversations, that we bring various different thoughts together is just beyond useful. I can't be happy with it enough. And I've been so challenged by the different thoughts here, but more than challenged, I've been greatly encouraged. I can see myself in the future in an environment where socially, whether or not we're convinced of anything spiritual or not, is really just an interesting point of discussion, and has nothing to do with whether or not we like each other, get along with each other, or intend to be decent human beings.
I can't see the screen, but next.
Okay.
It'd be Kevin.
Kevin, yes. Go.
Well, I think this is the 7th Cult of Honesty hangout I've been in now, and I have to say this is probably the best one so far. The way we dealt with the whole topic of dogmatism tonight is just so far beyond anything else I've ever seen, and I have a lot of really intelligent friends in my real life, but nowhere else is there that I could really have this level of conversation. So I'm definitely going to be sending this video to a few people. Yeah, thanks everybody.
Thank you, Kevin. Nelson, are you there, Nelson?
I'm gonna quote two people, and they're two of my favorite quotes, and I think they're relevant to this discussion. First is Carl Sagan. He says, "The cosmos is all that is and ever was and ever will be." And then Thomas Jefferson with, "The question with boldness, even the existence of God, because if there be one, he must more approve of the homage of reason than that of blindfolded fear." So I think if we take both of these quotes and weigh them in context, I think that we can find better answers than if we just constantly focus and dig up the dogmatic and late Bronze, early Iron Age beliefs systems of people that didn't know the elements of the cosmos like we do today. And I think that the mystery is where the magic really is. And I think that once all of us can realize that we're just one little piece in this great big cosmic puzzle, that we can then learn how we relate to each other without some big godparent in the sky that's watching over us. That's what I think.
That's good. Ozzy.
I'd like to sort of address that last point you put to me, Dr. Jones, about sort of getting beyond theism and atheism. We don't agree on that, you and I. I don't think we can avoid these labels. I think if a label applies, if it describes your view, your position, then just wear it. I don't try to avoid such labels. But what I think would help here is an important principle of reasoning and civil discourse. I've talked about it a little bit before. It's called the principle of intellectual charity, and it just says that you always should credit the other person, no matter how odd or unfathomable and irrational their views seem to you, always credit them with intelligence. Don't assume they're stupid, and certainly don't assume they're wicked. Treat their views respectfully, and even if you think that their stated reasons are only rationalizations and not really what motivates them, you have a much better chance of moving them and nudging them in the direction you want if you treat them respectfully and assume that they're intelligent people. It makes for longer, harder conversations, it's true. It's not as emotionally gratifying and rewarding and satisfying as when you just unleash and accuse the other person of being stupid, stubborn, irrational, and wicked. But you are setting an example for other people. Even if you don't penetrate that person, other people looking are going to be more impressed with you. And it doesn't matter which side of this argument that you're on, that's the better way to go. And I think if you're going to transcend these labels, if there's any sense to transcending these labels, I think it's just trying to embrace these norms of rational discourse and civility. I think that's the way it's got to go. The alternative isn't working, so I think that's a failed experiment. So just try to apply the principle of intellectual charity as mightily as you can.
I have to say that's awesome. I appreciate those statements. Okay, Tony. Oh, is it Daryl next? Okay, Daryl.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'd like to say how much I enjoy spending time on this hangout. I appreciate the opportunity to get to know and to spend time with each one on this panel. Just as far as I'm concerned, it can't be beat. But I also want to confess to having a pretty serious dogma, and it's this. I'm convinced that there's good in each and every human being, and that we actually have the ability to tap into that, and the more we can move toward each other instead of away from each other in such formats as we have here, the more potential we have of discovering that. And by the way, I hope that this particular dogma turns out to be true.
Tony.
Am I there? Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. It's really hard to say anything of value after everybody's already kind of laid it out there. But so on the topic of dogma, this is actually something that even with the form that we have, the company that we have, and I was distracted by 13 Heathen's dog too. That's why I kind of went with the competition. I was like, yeah, well, I got 3 right here. Ha! Oh yeah, of course, Dr. Jones got a. But anyway, yeah, this is kind of a topic where I think this is like one of the few places that you could ever go to have a topic about dogma in theism, and especially atheism. And I say especially atheism because a lot of people talk about dogma with theism, and I mean, really, to be honest, until Ozzy, I really didn't hear much about Jack. Stop it. I really didn't hear much. Sorry about that. I really didn't hear much about the dogma of atheism. At least I didn't take it very seriously. I mean, of course, I heard people, dogmatic atheism, and I was always just like, come on, like, get out of here. But it wasn't actually until somebody of a similar mindset as mine, being atheism, kind of not only called me out on it, but kind of called atheists out on it in general, that I really kind of sat back and was like, this is actually something I probably would have flipped out about, a few months ago, and I probably would have denied the existence of dogma and atheism, and and I would have gone to the whole, well, atheism's just one view on one position and this and that, and but then again, Christianity or Islam could also say the same thing, that well, their view is just on this and that it's other people that are twisting it and throwing all these other extra things. Anyway, point is, I think it's really, really, really awesome that we could actually have this discussion, not just have this discussion, but actually come out of it with with a better understanding. At least I'll speak for myself and say that I have a better understanding of the dogmatic tendencies of both sides, both theistic and atheistic. But there's man, there's so much here. I actually took notes on things I want to say. But as far as the label goes, to digress on what we were saying before about the label of it, what Ozzy was saying on the label of, well, atheist and theist and all this, the label is necessary because it gives somebody an idea of where you're at. When I think of, and not in the sense of, oh, well, I'm here and you're here, but if I'm talking to somebody about the kind of topics that we talk about, it is a good thing to understand where they're coming from on it, or where they're going to take in the information. The things I would say to a theist versus the way that I would say it to a atheist, they do differ. And with this sort of forum, I'm able to kind of take the biases and the form of the way I would say things and make it to where I'm also checking myself at the same time. And I would think that this is something that nobody should ever think ill of, is questioning your own self, or not so much questioning, maybe that was a poor word, but to hear what other people are saying, and even though they have other views on, or other worldviews on it, I'll use the term worldviews for the sake of this, it still gives validity. Not necessarily saying that I have to merge over to your side and say, oh, okay, but it really makes a big difference. Obviously, I had a lot of things to say, but I talk too much as it is. So.
Much like Dr. Jones and I were talking about earlier on my show, maybe years from now, the Holy Spirit will help you see this in a whole new way.
Come over to the dark side. We have cookies.
I will be one of the first atheists to say that. Who knows? I don't make any claims that I have absolute certainty of anything. I'm I'm okay with not having absolute certainty with anything. I'm not like I said earlier. Not in the video, but on the text. That I'm not so concerned about absolute certainties, especially being that I enjoy physics. I know I mean, come on. Like, there's things you just can't know. Maybe we'll figure out one day. Maybe we won't. But as long as we have these things that keep us going through life, as long as we don't try and impose onto other people, this is the way it is, and you have to think this way too, then that's fine. We can still talk about it. We can still see things from other people's point of views.
I'm more worried about being able to pay my property taxes within the volunteer than I am worried about whether or not my belief in God is really valid, you know?
Exactly. And it's still an important thing, but this is something that, you know, just it's unheard of, at least for me.
Well, I have to admit, I do get a little bit dogmatic sometimes, and it's fun. And so this is the end of the show, and so my dogmatism would be Jackie Brown. Say hello, Jackie Brown.
Proof of dog.
And so we do love Jackie Brown here at the studio, but I'd like to go over to the marker board because there's someone greater than me who is writing on my board. Look at this. Who is this guy? I think he has a mask on. Wow. Look at this guy.
NCG is the best. If you think otherwise, you're dead wrong.
Show this part.
That's scary.
Well,
that could be a new meme. Dogmatic Dog says.
I tell you what.
Actually, Urban Dictionary has a proper definition for Catma now, being the opposite of dogma.
This has been fun. I'd like for you guys, all of you who are watching, to become a part of our shows. I want you to get involved with NCG. We don't care whether you are an atheist or a theist or anything in between or outside of. We want you here because we value the human experience and the human conversation. And so just think about coming our way, and we will certainly go your way. We're simply trying to come together, simply trying to make sense with one another. So thank you for your time. Goodbye.